In Maine, lobsters are caught in traps or pots baited with fish to attract the crustaceans. Fishermen often work hundreds of pots a day. Lobster fishing, though, isn't as physically demanding as it used to be. Traps are now pulled from the water by machine instead of by hand, but what you haul up doesn't always mean money in your pockets. In Maine, size matters, and this gauge determines whether or not you can keep a lobster or you have to throw it back.
What we do to determine the legality of a lobster. A lobster's Homarus americanus has a minimum gauge size, and the minimum gauge size is measured from the eye socket to the back of the carapace. Now you got to remember that we're talking about a crustacean, which is an arthropod, which is just a big bug. And we use a gauge that goes in from the eye socket to the back of the carapace to be legal in Massachusetts and Maine waters. Our area here is 3 1/4 inch. And that lobster below that goes back in the water. That's our future stock. We also have a maximum gauge of 5 inches so that it goes in, and if the lobster is larger than that, that goes back in the water.
We caught a lobster that was so big that it wouldn't trap because its claw wouldn't go in here.
Oh, wow.
So a big lobster. And we caught it because it'd been sitting in its hole and not moving for years, and I think the trap landed on his hole. So then he was kind of mad and he tried to wiggle out and his claw got in the bridle.
Oh, no.
And we hauled him up. And he was all crusty.
Yeah, with barnacles.
Yeah, a couple barnacles, a little muscle in his ear, this kind of moss growing out right in his eye, and he just was sitting there. But he hadn't shed in years. He was like to maximum size. He's like a senior citizen of lobster. And he was just hanging out. And he wasn't moving much. He liked his hole.
So what'd you do?
He was oversized.
What I want to show you today is about V-notch. And V-notch is all about a female lobster. If a lobsterman catches a lobster and she has eggs on it, they're supposed to make what they call a V-notch, and it's in this particular flipper. And there's a special tool that they use, and they just take it and they clip it like that, which creates a V-notch. Now, if a lobsterman catches a lobster, and even though she still doesn't have eggs, if it's got the V-notch, they have to throw it back. That's the law, because that's considered a breeding.
Also rules for breeding females.
It's a female. It's got a notch in it, so we're going to let her go back and find her new husband.
Lobster is a female. You can see right here.
Where's the over?
This is a male. The females tend to have wider tails. We would have cut a notch in this fin. So whenever I get a lobster that's got eggs, I cut a notch in this fin. And you can never keep this lobster, and that notch will last through a couple molts. So this lobster will be nearly halfway to being an oversized, which we don't keep at all.
Why not?
Because they decided that a lobster that is 5 inches from the eye back, that lobster is worth more to the fisherman than, say, $30 or $40 you might get for that big lobster, because it would hold probably a quart of eggs, which would be a week's worth of fishing if they all grew up, the female would.
You understand the populations, you're cultivating them, you're making sure they're growing at a healthy rate, and you're not harvesting too much at one time.
Just about all those
Cats
things,
must
yeah.
be safely transferred to market.
Abandon the lobsters, trying to keep them so that they don't injure each other in storage. It's a live product that we're sending that's perishable, and we want to make sure they're in as good shape as they can be.
Commercial fishing of the spiny lobster is a multi-million-dollar-a-year industry in the Florida Keys. As is typical with industries that provide great wealth, there is great crime. For years, unscrupulous individuals have dumped trash in the Atlantic Ocean, the Gulf of Mexico, and Florida Bay in an attempt to attract spiny lobsters. These piles of garbage are called lobster condos or casitas. The condos consist of anything from cinder blocks to office furniture to old washing machines. In a natural environment, spiny lobsters inhabit coral enclaves, hard-bottom crevices, or sometimes they hide underneath sponges. However, if they happen upon a casita, they will stay there for shelter and protection from predators.
The casitas have actually historically been used in a lot of undeveloped countries as a fishery for people who don't have access to boats and they don't have the equipment to lift traps.
In this country, where materials and technology are readily available, lobster fisheries are overseen by government agencies. Part of their role is to ensure that lobster populations are not depleted through overfishing.
In the Florida Keys, the lobster fishery is regulated by the number of licenses and the number of traps that the commercial fishermen allow to put out.
Catching lobsters is diving. Diving for lobsters takes longer and yields less, but not if you know exactly where to find them because you have dumped an old freezer or storage locker. These divers can score up to 50 or 60 lobsters on a single structure.
What casitas do is provide shelter that's attractive to lobsters. Consequently, it congregates them in these habitats. This makes them easy target for commercial divers. And indeed, we've seen a slight but steady increase in the proportion of lobsters landed by commercial divers relative to trappers over the past.
These things are not properly cleaned. They may contain pollutants such as petroleum products. They're also some of them very lightweight in the sense of, not that I could pick them up, but in the sense that a strong storm or a hurricane that passes through, we feel that concentrating these animals in such a way and exploiting them through the fishery, the commercial catch of these, we're not only putting pressure on the lobsters themselves, but we feel like it's possibly changing the reproductive ecology and life history of the Florida spiny lobster.
With documented proof of the dangers of lobster condos to the marine environment, enforcement of laws against illegal dumping is legal necessary. Fishing for the spiny lobster is a livelihood for many families in the Florida Keys. As in other industries, those who break the law make it harder for honest citizens to make a living.
The people who are practicing this illegal fishing are not only causing ecological and environmental problems, but socioeconomic problems as well. The fisherman who is out there day in, day out pulling his traps, trying very hard to make a livelihood with his permit and do it by the rules, is being impacted far greater than I can even imagine.
While one boat fishes legally, his neighbor may have an unfair advantage by fishing habitats illegally placed. It isn't the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission that is hurt, but the spiny lobster and those who make a living by the rules. The number of lobsters caught in the Florida Keys in 2001 was the lowest in almost 25 years. The causes of this drop are uncertain, but the effects of lobster condos on a struggling industry could prove to be devastating. While there is no irrefutable proof that casitas keep lobsters from propagating, there is undeniable evidence that unpermitted artificial reefs are damaging to the marine habitat and lobster fisheries. The greed of a few could mean disaster for many. The dumping of anything in the ocean or bay is illegal. Lobster condos wreak havoc on coral reefs, seagrass beds, and especially lobster populations. Those who sneak around in the dark of night are committing a crime against their neighbors, the marine environment, and the spiny lobster.